good to be alive in this land of ours. Good to drive in this land of ours.
Hello, Canada hockey fans in the United States.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hockey Time Machine. I'm Glenn Dreyfuss. You know, early in my career, I was a TV weatherman. So let me limber up those muscles to bring you the forecast from southern Alberta. Poor visibility and snow and blowing snow this afternoon and evening. Northwest winds gusting to 60 kilometers an hour and falling snow. All of that will create poor visibility with blowing snow today, heading for an evening low of 17 degrees below 0 Celsius, which explains why our scheduled guest from Calgary, longtime Flames trainer Bearcat Murray, won't be our guest tonight. He's had to give his regrets, and we'll instead have him on in January 2022. But you know what they say in hockey, next man up. And Bearcat's only written one book, right? Stan Fischler has written more than 100. And recently, the hockey historian, broadcaster, and author was inducted into the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame.
I did want to become a goalie. So for a while, I was listening to the Ranger games on the radio, and I was on the rug, and my father was looking at me. What the hell are you doing on the rug trying to do that? I said, I'm trying to do a perfect split like Charlie Rayner, the Ranger goalie, but I couldn't do a perfect split. I couldn't even do a half a split. My father said, why don't you give up playing hockey? Why don't you write about hockey? So I followed his advice. He took me to see the Rovers play the Baltimore Orioles. I'll never forget, they had the beautiful brown uniforms and everything like that. And we went to the game, and I never stopped going to hockey after that. But that was just the start, so I had to do something related to hockey. And for my 10th birthday, I got a little Philco radio and a scrapbook with a three-dimensional Indian head on it, and I started clip out stuff from the papers, and the scrapbook got big and big, and now we're going to all these hockey games. And the beautiful thing about I never saw a Ranger game. These are all Rovers and the Met League. Met League were American guys, all American guys. I'll tell you about them later. But the thing was, in the program, there was lots of room. There were great programs. They had 5 stories, and on the lineup, they had a lot of white space. And after the game, I came home and I started to write just about the game, anything about the game. If my team lost, it was the referee's fault. And if the team won, I was a very happy guy. The point was, I'm writing. And basically, that was the start of what became a career in writing.
It's our pleasure to once again welcome not Stan Fischler this time, Hall of Famer Stan Fischler. Stan was recently inducted into the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame. So tell us about that whirlwind event in Denver, Stan.
Well, it began actually where I am now in Portland, Oregon, visiting my son Ben and his family. That would have been June. And that's when I got the call. Actually, 2 calls. The first call was kind of mysterious from somebody at USA Hockey who was unnamed, and he wanted to know whether I was going to be where I was. And I said yes. And the next day I got a call I think it was from Dave Fisher, who was the PR guy for USA Hockey, and he told me that I've been nominated for the Hall of Fame, and I was stunned. The reason I was stunned is usually there are hints about people who are pushing for you. I had heard nothing at all. So I actually was a little dubious that it might be some practical joke, but it wasn't. And the event, which was uh, December 9th, was marvelous. First of all, I had family there. I had my son Ben with his wife Kine and my two grandchildren from here. It was Ezra and Nico, and I had a bunch of friends from the New York area came out, which was fine. In fact, it was very gratifying. And the event was marvelous. It was very dreamlike stuff. First of all, to be there or to be nominated along with two of my favorite players certainly was huge. Peter McNabb being one, Paul Holmgren another. Unfortunately, Peter is ill and he couldn't make it. But being nominated with those two guys was very special because I don't consider myself, I'm a journalist, been writing, doing TV, but I don't consider that normally a Hall of Fame status or Hall of Fame. But since it was, I wasn't going to deny it or delete it. And the event itself was very unusual because they had the class of the previous class, 2020, which had been canceled because of COVID. So there were a lot of us there. Tony Granato, in particular, was from the previous class, and I knew him from his Ranger days. I used two words. First of all, the event was overwhelming. And the second part is, as I said in my speech, my operative word is grateful. I'm grateful for this whole thing to be around at my age, 89, and all these accolades, seeing so many friends from the hockey world at the event who were there to in the audience. The whole thing was just huge. I have to say, one of the guys who was there, who was a Brooklynite like me, was Lou Vero, who coached the 1984 U.S. Olympic team. Like myself, Louis grew up playing roller hockey on the streets of Brooklyn. And he even remembered a game where I played against him, where I cross checked from behind. I should have mentioned what caused me to do what he did to me. Anyhow, it was just a tremendous event, and uh, the more I think about it, the more I find it unbelievable. Really, it happened. I was there, but it's still very dreamlike.
You're a writer. How hard was it for you to write your Hall of Fame speech?
It was easy for me to write, and I made changes right up to the last day. And when I went up to the dais, I threw away my speech and I just winged it. I did that for two reasons. One was that I was one of the last speakers, and a lot of the previous speakers said things that would have been redundant in mine. And I had stories that I wanted to tell, and I work better ad libbing than I do reading from a page. So it was all ad lib. We were given 10 minutes by the host. Um, in this case, it was Dave Fisher, but he told us we didn't have to hew to it. The other thing that was interesting was that there was a time clock that was pretty visible if you weren't making the speech. But when you're up at the dais, you ignore the time clock. And we were given 10 minutes, and I did 21 minutes and didn't realize it until later. And that was no big deal to anybody. Nobody fussed over it that, that I knew of. And that was it. I winged it.
You know,
And
I'm glad that you got the whole 21 minutes because toward the end, I thought one of the most poignant parts of your speech are when you talked about what you thought you had contributed. And that didn't come until minute 17 or 18. And they were two things. And one was helping being a mentor, and the other is bringing humor to hockey. So, would you speak for a minute to us about both of those things?
well, back in, I think it was around 1972, my wife Shirley and I began taking interns into our office to help us. And as the years went by, we had interns almost every year, and many of them have done very well in the sports business. Frank Brown was, I think, the second year Frank Brown went to the Associated Press and hockey writer at the Daily News. And I think for more than 20 years, he was Commissioner Bettman's real sidekick, so to speak. He was very, very important for the NHL. And he came out of my office. And he was there, by the way, to hear what I had to say about it. Another one was Jessica Berman, who was going to Michigan U when she interned with me. Jessica went on to become one of the most important people on the NHL's legal team. She was there also. And David Kolb, was an intern with me. David became my co-publisher of the Fischler report, and also my agent. And there were any number of former interns who went on to success, and I was very proud of that. A long, long list. And as far as humor goes, I've always said that hockey is the most serious of sports, the most intense. And I always felt that it was my job to bring humor into it. And one of the ways I did was to tell jokes to coaches, even John Tortorella when he was in Rangers, Tom Runney when he was with the Rangers, Jack Capuano when he was with the Islanders. I'd catch these guys before the game when they were more relaxed, and I'd tell them a joke. And same thing happened, by the way, at our TV production meetings. And this goes back to 1994 when I actually began doing it, telling jokes at the production meetings. It lightens up a very tense situation. I was very pleased that I was able to make people laugh.
Since you brought up the Fischler report, that site made some news too. And that is that you're now under the Hockey News umbrella. How did that come about? And what does that mean for the site?
Well, the Fischler report began 29 years ago when one of the NHL owners, it was Bruce McNaughton, who owned the Kings. He suggested that I do it. And I said, okay, I'll do a few. It would be just hockey news around that I happen to hear and write about. And it was typed out. It's before computers. And he liked it. He gave me a good price to sell it to others in the business. Lou Lamoriello was one of the first also. And I got about, first time around, I got about 8 or 9 hockey people, and it grew from there. Shirley, my wife, handled the business end, but after a while she got tired of that. And then Dave Kolb came along, my former intern. But I would say over the last 10 years, it diminished because there were so many other outlets um, around that really brought more important news faster, I would say. But Dave Kolb and I decided we'd try something different. And over the past, I'd say about almost a year, we had something on the website that came out 5 times a week. The, the Monday one was called the Fischler Report, which was a lot of a main topic and a lot of other stuff. Then on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, it was called Java Drive, which was more pungent, shorter stories. And we wanted to find somebody who would be interested in it. And it took a long time, but the Hockey News decided to take it over. And now I'm running the official report on Mondays. Wednesdays is something called From the Archives, which is a historic piece, which I take either from the Hockey News or from my scrapbook, which I have now digitized. And Friday is kind of a Java Drive kind of thing. I have a main story and then a lot of more shorter ones. And we've been going now for 2 weeks, and so far, so good.
Now to the main course, your newest book, Tales of Brooklyn. And if this wasn't Tales of Brooklyn, could I do this? I don't think so. In any case, the first hockey tie-in for Tales of Brooklyn is if it wasn't for a well-known former NHL goalie, this book might not have been written.
There's no question. Glenn Chico Resch has been a pal of mine back to his Islander days, 1974, 75. And we worked together doing Devil's Telecast for many, many years. And when we'd be on the road, every once in a while, he'd ask me to tell him a story about growing up in Brooklyn, which I did. He particularly liked one story about my Aunt Hattie, who came in from Albany and who was a big ice cream fan, to put it mildly, and how on a blizzard day, on December 27th, 1947, we ran out of ice cream at our house, and Aunt Hattie sent up an SOS for me to get ice cream, gave me $5 to get a quart of chocolate, and the story apparently resonated with Chico because it was very tough for me to find ice cream. When I finally got back to the house, my Aunt Hattie threw the ice cream in the garbage because it wasn't the company she liked. Chico thought this was a hilarious story. And from time to time, he would ask me to tell it over and over again. And a year ago, his wife, Diane, sent me an email asking me if I would write it down. That is, write the Aunt Hattie story in an email and send it to her, which I did. And I didn't think anything of it. And she wrote back and she said she liked it very much in print. Would I send her another, a different one? So I had to think a little bit, and then I picked some episode out from my past and sent it to her, and she liked that. So after the second one, she wanted still another, and I said to myself, why don't I send these to friends as well and see if I get some other reactions? And I sent it to a cousin, actually two cousins, one or two other friends, and they wrote back that the story that I sent kind of resonated with their own lives, and they asked me to do some more. Well, by the time I got to the sixth one, I was actually on a roll, literary roll, and I was enjoying now thinking of stories and then writing them. I was doing this, by the way, on the side. This was not a top priority for me. But when I got to the 20th story, I sent some to my literary agent, Doug Whiteman. And he said, if you can do 10 more, do 30, I'll turn it into a book. And actually, I did 35 stories altogether, and that's how the book. And you got the book, and it certainly wouldn't have happened if Diane Resch, Glenn's wife, hadn't said, "Send me a story." It never would have happened. So I point that out in the forward of the book that if it hadn't been for the Resch family, there wouldn't be a book, and that's the truth.
Well, Stan, I wrote to you and told you this, but you're a bigger man than I am because in the Dreyfuss household, if somebody goes through a blizzard to get ice cream, and let's leave aside why are you going out in a blizzard for ice cream of all things, but okay, and you come back from the blizzard, a heroic act, and then the ice cream doesn't even get eaten. In the Dreyfuss household, that would be the height of chutzpah.
Well, it was, but you have to know that my Aunt Hattie was the Duchess of Chutzpah, and there are legends about other episodes she pulled. Now, the interesting thing here is that at the time, I was crushed. First of all, it was not. I loved being out in the snow at that time, and I loved schlepping for about the first half hour. But I realized that there were no candy stores open. I dreaded the fact that I would come back empty-handed. I finally did find one, and the last 15 minutes getting home were very, very chancy. It was tough. I was beat, really beat. And when I finally got into the house and put the brown paper bag, which was now soaked from the snow, on the kitchen table, my aunt wasn't there. I retreated to the vestibule, took off my galoshes, my mackinaw, and my cap, and then I heard this groan from the kitchen. I dashed in to see what was the matter, and my Aunt Hattie, stared at me and said, "You mean you got reeds?" Well, there were four top ice creams in Brooklyn: Breyers, Hortons, Seal Test, and Borden's. Now, Reed's was at the bottom. Reed's was to a connoisseur of ice cream what Thunderbird would be to a connoisseur of wine. It was the worst. It was the worst. Of course, I was crushed when she tossed it in the garbage, but over the years, I began reflecting on it, and it turned out that, really, my Aunt Hattie was a connoisseur, and a connoisseur wouldn't go near anything like Reed's ice cream, and that's why I, after a half century, I decided she did the right thing.
Ah, you've mellowed. All right. Within a pivotal chapter of Tales of Brooklyn, the one sentence uttered in 1939 by your father, Ben, that would forevermore change the life of a 7-year-old Stan Fischler. Quote, "We're not going to see Snow White. We're going to see a hockey game."
Well, that was a turning point. Snow White was a big deal for kids, like Star Wars became more recently. And my dad promised me that we were going to go Sunday to see it. And we got on the subway. Sunny day when we left. When we got out at 50th Street and 8th Avenue, it was downpour. I mean, didn't have an umbrella. And of course, at 50th and 8th happened to be not only the subway station, but the old Madison Square Garden. In those days, on Sunday afternoons in the winter, they had double headers. Not the Rangers. The Rangers farm team was called the Rovers, and they played in the old Eastern League. And there was also a Met League game. But we got there just before the Rover game went on at 3:30, and the fact that we weren't going to see Snow White drove me nuts. I started crying. I didn't know from hockey. I didn't know where we were going. He yanked me into the garden. He wouldn't give in to me. And once I got in there, I figured, well, I got to get even with him somehow. And I saw he was rooting for the home team, the Rovers. So I rooted for Washington. and they beat the Rovers. So my father got beaten by me, so to speak. And the next day, I went to school, PS 54, and my third grade teacher, Mrs. Gould, called on me to do something called show and tell, which is basically picking a subject, in this case, the hockey goalie, because I was fascinated, loved watching the goalie. So Mrs. Gould called on me. I did a show and tell the hockey goalie, and she gave me an A. Well, an A was a big deal. I began to think this hockey ain't too bad after all. Following Saturday, my father made good on his promise, took me to see Snow White, and on the way home, I remembered we were in the subway, and I said, Dad, do you think you can take me to another hockey game? Sure enough, the next day we were back at the Garden. The Rovers were playing Baltimore, and I don't know whether you ever saw an Oriole, the bird, but these were the Baltimore Orioles hockey players, and they had the Oriole brown on brown colors. They were beautiful uniforms. Never saw anything like it since. But it was a great hockey game. Again, my guys won. My father's team lost, and never stopped going to hockey after that. Snow White, thank you.
Tales of Brooklyn is liberally sprinkled with hockey stories, like why were there maple leafs painted on the back wall of your childhood home?
Well, from 1942 until 1952, I was a passionate Toronto Maple Leaf fan. And the Leafs were, it was perfect timing because in 47, the Leafs won the first of three straight cups. So by 49, they were the first dynasty in NHL history. And it was in the middle of the summer of 49. They'd won three cups. And my parents and my grandparents were away. I don't know where they were. And I was alone at the house. And we had this big wall, garage wall at the end of our little garden. And there was nothing, there was not too much to look at but bricks. And I decided to do something about it and honor my favorite team. So I first painted the wall white, and then I paint with the Leafs color, which was royal blue and white. I painted two large maple leafs, very large, and two crossed hockey sticks and a puck in the middle. And I thought it was a great piece of artwork, to tell you the truth, until my grandmother, the art critic, came home and, you know, not too pleased about it, but there was no way she was going to erase it. And I have a picture of the wall in the book, of course, with the maple leaves,
Well,
and it stayed that way. It stayed that way until the house was sold.
the Maple Leafs repaid your loyalty because in the book you say in 1949 the Leafs helped you get over a high school romance with a girl named Elaine.
Yeah, I was in love with Elaine Eiglosh, whose father was the pharmacist at DeKalb Avenue in Marcy. And Elaine was a cheerleader at my Eastern District High School for the basketball team. And we had a nice, we got along great. She only lived 5 blocks away. And I don't know, to this, I think I wrote that. I'm not sure exactly how and why we broke up, but we did break up. And I remember that afternoon I was sitting alone and playing Bunny Berrigan's I Can't Get Started. That was a great tune. Can't Get Started with You. And I was very, very depressed. And then I began to think about the Maple Leafs and, another, another great season. I mean, imagine three straight cups. And so hockey relieved my depression, and my romance with the Leafs actually continued until 1952.
One more Leafs tie-in. How did you and your wife Shirley end up taking Carl Brewer and his wife to the beach in New York?
Well, Brewer was a young star on the Maple Leafs when they changed their lineup around the start of the 60s. Punch Imlach was the coach, and they had a blend of young guys like Carl Brewer, Bobby Bourne, Dave Keon, Dickie Duff, real good, and some older players who were still very good. And I was assigned to do a profile of Brewer for Sport magazine, which was big stuff then. And we bonded, Carl and I, we bonded, and we stayed very good friends. And one summer, he and his wife Marilyn visited New York in the middle of the summer. We took him to the beach. It was Neponset, which is right next to Reese Park. Beautiful beach, and we were just good pals for a long, long time, and it was just a very pleasant experience away from the hockey wars. Just a fine old time at the Atlantic Ocean.
A fine time, except no place to change in and out of your trunks.
Well, usually if you went to Reese Park, you went to a bathhouse. But if you went to Neponset, there was no bathhouse. So you had to first take your clothes off, quickly wrap a towel around your naked body, and then quickly put the bathing suit on. And after the swimming, you had to quickly take the bathing suit off, wrap that towel around, and then put your clothes on. It was an act that people who were native New Yorkers like myself were used to doing. Um, the quick change act didn't go over as well with the Brewers, I can tell you that.
You could have embroiled Carl Brewer in a tremendous scandal.
Well, there was also there weren't too many people on the beach, and we were tossing a ball around, and the ball went close to some guy, and I don't know whether it was his girlfriend or not. And he said something stupid to Carl, and Carl didn't have to throw any punches. He had a way of glaring. He had one of those intense glares, and this guy practically melted on his blanket. I can't imagine what would have happened if a fight had broken out because Carl was a pretty tough guy.
Okay, here's a name that may not have been uttered in 60 years, a hockey goalie from the book, but I'm going to say it now if I can. Nick Pidsodny.
Well said. Well said. Well, during the war, uh, there were a lot of most of the really best players in the NHL went off to the armed forces, both the American and Canadian armed forces. Um, Baltimore had been a big hockey town before the war. Their team, the Orioles, which I told you before, I went to see, disbanded, and the Coast Guard had a base in Baltimore, and they put together a team. Now, at the end of the war, the Baltimore Orioles came back. Coast Guard, of course, team had disbanded with the end of the war. Um, and they had another team in Baltimore. And this time they called them the Blades, Baltimore Blades. I believe they were owned by Eddie Shaw, who also owned the Springfield team and was formerly one of the all-time greats. And I took to players. Uh, some of the players fascinated me that wouldn't have impressed anybody else. Anyhow, first of all, I love the name Nick. and Pizzadni was a name I'd never heard before, never heard since. And he was a tough goalie. He was also a good goalie. And he reminded me of later of Billy Smith. He played a lot like Billy Smith, very tough. And he fascinated me. And I became very, very involved with rooting for the Baltimore Blades. They had some colorful guys besides Nick Pizzadni. They had a defenseman named Paul Waldner, who had a great nickname. His nickname was Boxcar because he looked like a skating boxcar. And a guy named Arlie Carlson, Whitey Carlson. Neat guys on this team. And of course, nobody to me was neater than Nick Pizzadni. Loved the guy. Years later, by the way, just for the hell of it, I phoned Hamilton, Ontario, which was his hometown, and I actually was able to get his number, and I chatted with him, and I told him about how much I loved, watching him with the Blades. He had a brother, Nick Pizzadni, who also played defense. He wasn't on the same team. He was on the Boston Olympics, and he was good. But so Nick was one of my heroes that nobody else probably ever heard of besides me.
Okay, now we've honored Nick Pizzadni. Clear up a mystery for me if you can. There's a picture in the book of a New York Ranger, Lou Fontanato. He's in street clothes with his arms around your mother, Molly, and your father, Ben. But I didn't find anything in the book to explain context for that picture. So, what were those three people doing together?
That'll be in my next book. No, the series. Louis, I worked for the Rangers in 54, 55. Louis was a promising defenseman playing for our team in Saskatoon, the Saskatoon Quakers. And Louis was brought up to the big club. Regular guy, very tough, big fan favorite, huge fan favorite. And so we became pals. If somebody was a pal of mine, I'd tell him, you ever want to come over and get a good goulash dinner, come over to 582 Marcy in Williamsburg, and my grandmother will cook up a great dinner for you. So Louis came over, and I think he came over more than once because I took him to Brooklyn a lot. He loved coming to Brooklyn. And so we had the dinner, and then we took pictures. I have pictures with Louis and my grandpa Simon, and that was one of them. And to tell you the truth, I guess the point of that particular picture was to show my parents, and I guess in retrospect there should have been a caption that explained who Louis was and why he was there.
Well, Louis didn't need a reason, but now we've cleared up the mystery. So thank you. Lester Patrick Night at Madison Square Garden, November 1947. First, let's go back and for people who don't know, remind us who Lester Patrick was.
Lester Patrick was one of the most famous of all hockey men. He was a great player back in the pre-NHL days. He was a defenseman. He and his brother Frank were great hockey pioneers. They built a professional league on the West Coast with big rinks in Vancouver, Victoria, and they eventually, when the NHL became big time, they sold the league and players to the new NHL teams. And Lester came to New York as the Rangers manager and coach in 1926, and he remained through. They won the Cup in 28, they won the Cup in 33, and they won the Cup in 1940. By 1940, Frank Boucher, who had been a star on the other teams, was coach. But Lester really, in a sense, was to New York hockey what George Steinbrenner had been with the Yankees to baseball. He was the top hockey guy. And the league later created a Lester Patrick Trophy for service to hockey in the United States, and I was lucky to win that along with Brian Leach of the Rangers, former Ranger great, and John Halligan, who had been a PR guy for the Rangers, and Cami Granato, one of the first great female hockey players in America.
I was leading into the other connection I was going to digress to between you and Lester Patrick, but you guessed the answer before I asked the question. So let's go back to that night, Lester Patrick night at the Garden. The Rangers and your beloved at the time Maple Leafs, you're in the stands and you make a friend.
Well, I went to the game with another friend who wasn't a hockey person, but I went to the game because the Maple Leafs were playing. And by that time, I would go to practically all the Ranger games because I was allowed to, not when I was a little kid. And there were 15,925 people in the Garden. That was the capacity. And when the Rangers scored, 15,923 got up and screamed and yelled. And the guy next to me on my left didn't get up, and I didn't get up. And I was aware of that. And then about 10 minutes later, Bill Ezenicki scored for Toronto, and this guy next to me and I were the only ones who got up and screamed. So by the end of the first period, we realized we had something in common. We were both Maple Leaf fans. He was a Roman Catholic Irish Catholic kid from Woodside, Queens. I was a Jewish kid from Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And by the time the game was over, we had become good friends. And he told me that he played for a roller hockey team in Woodside. And I told him I was dying to play on a roller hockey team. He invited me to come out, and I was a defenseman on the Woodside Whippets. Lovely, lovely, lovely name. Loved that name. And we became best friends. During the summer, I'd ride my bike from Williamsburg out to Woodside, see him. And we really, from that season on, went to every Maple Leaf game together. In fact, in the spring of '52, Jimmy, myself, and a couple of other guys drove to Canada to see game 3 of the Maple Leaf Red Wings series. It was quite an exhibition, quite exciting just to be in a foreign country, even though it was just Canada. So Jimmy and I, we were a Jewish guy and a Irish Catholic guy. We became best friends, and we stayed best friends forever. Jimmy died about 7 years ago, but we stayed in touch right down to the end. The other guy who was in in the car was Freddie Meyer. Actually, two other guys, Buddy Carl Glickman, and I played roller hockey together a couple of years later on the Brooklyn Wizards. That was our other team. And Freddie Meyer from the Woodside Whippets has been a friend of mine forever, and I'm still in touch with Freddie. Freddie lives in Greenwood Lake, New York, and I talk to him at least once a month. Wonderful guy. So the links from roller hockey back in '47 with the Woodside Whippets remained intact.
Stan, the book Tales of Brooklyn was very personally enjoyable for me. My grandparents on my mother's side, Nathan and Julia, lived most of their lives in a 3-story walk up across the street from Prospect Park on Ocean Avenue in Brooklyn. It's where my mother, Ruth, spent her childhood, and on those rare winter days when the ponds would freeze over, she would ice skate, and also at the rink there. So it meant a lot to me, brought me back a lot of smiles. But I also want to tell everybody You remember, Stan, in the subways, they used to have a brand of rye bread that they'd say, you don't have to be Jewish to love this rye bread. And they'd show a Native American or some nuns or whatever. Well, I just want to tell everybody, you don't have to be Jewish or from Brooklyn to enjoy Tales of Brooklyn. If you have a family, and everybody does, you will get a lot out of this book. So I just want to say, well done.
Appreciate that. As I said, it was a labor of love. I had no intentions to write it, but once I started, I couldn't stop.
Let me address, before we part, one modern day NHL issue that has kind of put a bee in your bonnet, a crinkle in your hockey sweater, and that is the issue of the butterfly style of goaltending. Because this quote just came out today from Ben Bishop, who just will not play hockey again because he was injured. And I want to read to you what he said. And this is just as we're taping this, a couple of hours old. Ben Bishop, who was a star goalie with the Dallas Stars and Tampa Bay Lightning, said, quote, "If I was a forward, I could be playing right now. But just with the butterfly, the torque you put on your knee, it just really couldn't get better." So this is something you've been harping on, and I wanted you to have a chance to talk to us about it.
Well, actually, I have somebody who is a goaltending expert writing a piece on this very subject. I watch time and again, over and over, goals being scored, and I see guys are shooting high because the guys are down on their knees. Now, the butterfly was never called a butterfly when it was invented. It was invented by Glenn Hall, one of the all-time great goalies. What I called it was the inverted V, and Glenn Hall would only use it occasionally to make a save. He was more what you would call a hybrid. He was a stand-up goalie, but every once in a while he would go down into the inverted V. And over the years, it was copied, and it became so prevalent, I would say, within the last 20 years, that in goalie schools, they were teaching kids what they call the butterfly because it's easy for a kid to go down on his knees. It's not as easy to be a stand-up goalie and to have to cut down the angles. And as far as I'm concerned, it really corrupted the goaltending style. And I feel that I didn't know about this Ben Bishop quote, which is tremendously significant because I've been saying all along. If you look at goaltenders today, you look at the league. Almost every team has a goalie getting hurt. I just read, I forget which team it was. Another goalie went down. Goalies are going down almost every week with some kind of injuries, and it's because of this cockamamie butterfly that is basically a stupid maneuver, but it's taught in the schools, and the guys think, they think this is going to be the be all end all, and of course it isn't. And I'm sad about Ben Bishop's career being over, but it certainly might resonate now, and maybe some of the goalies will wise up and go back to stand up.
Once again, Stan, you're ahead of the curve.
As long as it's not a knuckleball, I'll go with the curve.
Do you have any jokes for us?
Yeah, I have the new world's fastest joke. Guy runs in.
Tell it?
Yeah. Guy runs into a bank, goes up to the lady teller and says, "Can you check my balance?" And she pushed him.
See, the rest of the interview was just so I could get to the joke.
Well, I'll tell you a joke that only 2 out of 5 get it the first time, and that's by actual count. A skeleton goes into a bar and orders a beer and a mop. Do you get it?
Yeah, because there's no place to put the
Right.
beer.
Well,
once
you're
you
one of the two who does get it. You should be proud of yourself. That's a tough one for a lot of people. Then I have to explain when they're staring at me, and I have to explain. Well, skeletons. The beer goes down on the floor, and then they find, oh, that's the way it is.
So maybe I should be more worried because I did get the joke, and we seem to be on the same wavelength.
Don't worry about that. Worry about not being Nick Pizzadney.
And on that note, Stan, it is always a pleasure. You're always so generous with your time. Thank you so much. And again, congratulations on your induction to the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame.
Well, I'm sure you know how much I enjoy doing this with you. So thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Okay. So this is me talking with sound. There's no after party tonight. We're all a little verklempt. So I'm going to use my extra time because the show's short and because there's no after party. I'm going to use my extra time to put up my Festivus poll. And of course, with the putting up of the Festivus poll is the traditional airing of grievances. Because I have a lot of problems with you people. Good night.